Good morning, heathens, heretics, backsliders, faithless people, whatever other terms they have for those of us that don't find ourselves at church on a Sunday morning. This is the Promise Backlund Show, Sunday Service Edition. More like an anti-service. I don't know what we're going to call it yet, but so far I'm going with Sunday Service because this episode will be coming out every Sunday morning, and it's going to focus on topics surrounding life post-faith. We will talk about the Bible sometimes. We will talk about different breaking news stories surrounding evangelical scandal. We will also still do the frequently asked, or not frequently, the Q&A section where you guys can email in, keep them, pretty succinct, please, but questions that I can answer on here that might help other people who are questioning their faith, who have left the faith, who grew up in purity culture, things like that. And then Wednesdays, I will have that be more of my kind of random episode. I'll still keep the same segments that I did in the last episode, but the Wednesday editions will be different, and we won't talk so much about this topic. And that way there's kind of a little bit of a break between different things. But then on Sunday mornings, if you are wanting to stay, quote, on topic and discuss things surrounding religion and leaving the faith, this will be a place you can come and hang out. So with that being said, I wanted to share a funny little thing because it is Halloween weekend. Here in Finland, Halloween isn't so much of a thing, so I haven't done much this year. But my friend Christina Hart, which if you aren't following her, you should be. She is absolutely hilarious, and she happens to be a comedian, so that worked out really well for her. But she shared something talking about how she wasn't allowed to celebrate Halloween growing up, and finally was allowed to go celebrate one year or something like that because she dressed up as an angel. And I remembered that absolutely happened to me as well. I think my sisters and I one year all dressed up as angels, and we were allowed to go trunk or treating or something like that. But we definitely weren't allowed to celebrate Halloween. Most of my younger Halloweens, we would lock the front door and turn off all the lights and go down into our basement and watch movies. And so I thought that Halloween was some horrible thing where people are going door to door doing terrible things. And then as I got a little bit older, I realized that I was just missing out on a lot of free candy and a lot of fun and dressing up. So we were allowed to start doing kind of like some church events, where they would have stuff in the church gym. And then eventually, my cousins, like preteens, were having all these elaborate fun costumes, and they would go trick-or-treating in their fancy neighborhood and get king-size candy bars, and I wanted to so bad. And so we convinced my mom to let us go trick-or-treating with our cousins. But her condition was that we had to pass out tracts. And if you don't know what those are, they are like these little tiny magazines or little booklets that share the story of the gospel and are meant to convince somebody to say the sinner's prayer at the end. Sometimes they're kind of illustrated, and they can range anywhere from being sweet and, manipulative to hellfire and brimstone sort of thing. So looking back, that is the most wildly performative thing that my mom had us do. And I think she would even agree, and she would think that was silly now. But at the time, that's what she thought was the right thing to do. We're going around in Franklin, Tennessee, to houses where I guarantee you all of them go to church every weekend. They know the gospel story. We're knocking on their doors. We're saying trick or treat. We are getting our candy, and then we're saying, and this is for you. God bless you. And we'd give them a tract. And it's just crazy, the things that evangelical culture had us doing. And honestly, kind of fucked up as well. I think it's really sad people that are extremely into Halloween that weren't allowed to celebrate or participate growing up. And it makes me so happy to hear stories of people now. My best friend, she goes all out for Halloween, and she does a Halloween party usually and always has really cute costumes and decorates her whole house. And she gets really into spooky season. And I just love hearing about stuff like that. So if you're somebody that wasn't allowed to celebrate Halloween and you have similar traumatic stories, feel free to share in the comments with the rest of us. I also wanted to say, before we move on to the first part of the show, which is actually going to be an anti-sermon on free will. Spoiler, I don't believe in it. But I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for the support on the last episode. That meant so much to me that you guys would watch, especially while I'm still getting started and getting a feel for how these things are going to go. And I, may not be saying the most exciting, cool things, but just that we're getting to hang out and experience this process together as I hopefully get better and better at this and put out better content for you guys. It just means so much that you guys are showing up and having conversation in the comments. I'm trying to reply to all of the comments. You guys have left so many. It's amazing. And I'll do that on each episode. In the beginning, I'm going to focus a lot of my comment response time here, but please don't take it personal if eventually I get less great at that and have to slow it down. I have comments on all of the different platforms I run, and it's so many, but I'm going to try my best. So that being said, just a reminder, if you have questions that you want to send in for the Q&A segment of each episode, please try to keep them short. I'm more likely to use them for an episode if you do that. You can send them to thepromisebacklundshow@gmail.com. And I'll have that listed in the description too. But that is a good way also to have your question be heard by everyone else. I'll keep it anonymous, but it might help other people. So if you're willing to send those in, I think we would all appreciate it. Before we get to the anti-sermon, I was thinking about going to church as a kid. And one of the few things that I really enjoyed about it was that most pastors, including my dad, would share a joke before each sermon. And some of you are going to roll your eyes at this part and hate it. And that's okay. I'm in my 30s. I know I'll be as corny as I want to be, and I love it. But I was thinking, I kind of want to do riddles before our Sunday service anti-sermons, because then we have a little bit of critical thinking just to like wake up our brains and, really think something over. Some of you are probably amazing at riddles and you're going to think the ones I pick are stupid. And I'm sorry ahead of time. I'll try to increase the level as we go. But I am going to pick a riddle every week and I will share the answer, but you can pause it if you want to think about it and leave your comment with your guess, and we'll see if you get it right. But this riddle, I thought was pretty clever. It is, poor people have me, rich people need me, but if you eat me, you'll die. What am I? I'll read it one more time. Poor people have me, rich people need me, but if you eat me, you'll die. What am I? The answer, pause. When you come back, I'll share it. The answer is nothing. Poor people have nothing. Rich people need nothing. If you eat nothing, you'll eventually die. So that's our riddle for the day. But I want to talk about free will. And I think this is a good thing to talk about for this first episode because it is so essential to evangelical culture. This idea that humans have, free choice, that we're deciding things for ourselves. And I understand that you also have Calvinists and all that, which we'll get into, but I'm going to typically talk about evangelical culture on this show because that's how I grew up. And that's the kind of culture that's trying to take over my country right now. So to me, it's important to discuss these thoughts. But what's important to note is that while evangelicalism claims this free will idea, everything we know about the universe around us, everything science has told us so far, and even some of the most brilliant philosophers have reached the conclusion that free will is not a thing. So it's essential to faith, and then it's seemingly missing from reality, which feels like a lot of things in religion, but we will get into that. What is free will to evangelicals? So for those of you who had the luxury of not growing up that way, free will is this idea that we are moral agents, that we get to choose between good and evil, that this is a God-given gift. It's what allows you to accept God's salvation or reject it. And it is important to evangelicals that this free will exists because then they can criticize you for rejecting the gospel. Because if you're not accepting salvation, you are rejecting it. They make these claims, in my comment section all the time, telling me, well, you made your choice. You chose to walk away. And so they need this free will because otherwise sin is something they can't really hold against you. If you don't have free will, they can't give you rewards like heaven because you didn't choose that. Why would you get credit for that? The whole thing is about this, like, did you earn it or not? Even though they will say, oh, well, we don't earn things. It's just accepting God's grace. It's accepting Jesus's gift. It's accepting that he died on the cross for us. But it's dependent on you supposedly choosing this. So there is this level of, did you earn it or not? And it's also very important to evangelical culture because there's this saying, it's about relationship, not religion, which I could do a whole anti-sermon on that. Maybe that's what we'll do next week. But this idea that, you're freely choosing God. And I remember always hearing growing up, God doesn't want robots. He wants people that choose him freely. And it's like, well, if we're supposed to do what God wants, and that's what God wants, then aren't we being robots by like choosing him freely? It didn't make sense to me. And another thing that's important to note is that evangelicals believe that God is all-knowing and all-powerful, which is why then you have this breakdown in theological debates between different parts of Christianity. Like you have Calvinism and you have, I can't remember the other word for it now. It starts with an A. They disagree there as well. And I remember growing up thinking like Calvinists were horrible because from what I gathered, they believed that God was just sending people to heaven and sending people to hell and that we had no, it was divine authority. And that was a horrible thing to think. But now looking at it, I'm like, I feel like they're being a little bit more honest about how these things work. And another side note, ultimately, I don't believe that we choose our beliefs. And I can give an example of that. I've shared this on TikTok and stuff before. But right now, if you were to hook me up to a 100% accurate lie detector test, and you were to tell me that if I don't choose to believe that Santa Claus exists, I am going to get shot. Here's the problem. I'm going to get shot. I want to stay alive. I don't mind lying to stay alive. I'm going to tell you, I believe Santa exists and I can act like Santa exists. But if I'm not truly convinced, that lie detector test is going to rat me out. And yes, we can change our mind based off of evidence. We can have different psychological conditioning that influences things, but you can't just flip a switch and believe something or not believe something. So it's very interesting to me. I've had debates even once with a family member saying that they do think belief is a choice. And I said, well, could you choose to stop believing in God right now? And they said, yes. And to me, that is very telling because that makes me think that, and I'm not trying to pull the, no true Christian thing, but that makes me think that you're not really actively believing a God exists. You're choosing to act as though you do. And those are very different things because if you sincerely believe something, you are convinced that it is true. Because you're either convinced of something or you're not convinced of it. The other issue I have is this idea that you have an all-knowing God and an all-powerful God, and yet you're being told that you choose whether you go to heaven or hell. But if that God knows everything that's going to happen, so for example, we'll use myself. Let's say that there is a God, and this God knows everything, all-knowing. And I haven't even been born yet, but God decides to either let me be born or decides I'm going to be born, or however that God would go about that. And that God knows that ultimately, at the end of my life, I'm going to die an atheist and therefore be damned to hell according to his standards. And that God decides to allow me to be created anyways, or to create me anyways, or however we want to word that. That God has essentially created me just to go to hell. And there's no way you can get around that if this God is truly all-knowing and all-powerful. So it's just not a compatible theology with reality, with what we know about how the world works. If this God is actually knowing everything, then this God is creating everything to go exactly as it is. Every genocide that has occurred, not just the ones in the Bible that he definitely ordained, he has ordained. Every time a child has been abused, God ordained that because this all-knowing God knew all of that would happen and move forward with the choices he did or didn't make anyways. So when Christians want to get into that whole topic, it falls apart so quickly for me. The other side of the view, back to free will in general. If we look at reality, if we look at what science and philosophy has taught us about reality, free will doesn't seem to be a thing. Determinism does. Determinism is the idea that every event, everything that happens, is caused by a prior cause. And so, for example, I have a cup of tea. I chose to make myself a cup of tea before I started this episode. But did I really choose it? Because I actually just happened to have tea in my cabinet. That meant another day I went and bought that. I also decided to have tea, or feel like I decided to have tea, because I didn't finish my coffee this morning. I forgot about it. It got cold and I wanted a little bit more caffeine. So did I make that choice? Because if I had finished the cup of coffee, I probably wouldn't have chosen to have this tea. But the only reason I didn't finish my coffee is because I got distracted by something that was outside of my control. So you see these things go on and on and on. And it's funny because people have no problem looking at the external world, things that, even relate to animals or relate to, if I, drop a rock into water, water is going to splash out. And that was not a decision or choice. It's just kind of what happens. And yet that's happening with us as humans. We just can't see it in real time. Our brain is going through this process and following these different patterns and reacting to things that are completely outside of our control. We just perceive it as control. Free will is an illusion. Free will is something that we just feel like we have. And I still think it's important to embrace that feeling. I don't think there's a problem with that. But we have to recognize that feeling like something is true doesn't mean that it is. And oftentimes in evangelicalism, they use these feelings. Well, I mean, you made that choice. Don't you feel like you made that choice? To make claims. And it's not sufficient. The other thing with this whole idea that we are not technically making these choices, it's not just things like tea and how I got distracted earlier. And so that's why I didn't have the rest of my cup of coffee, which ultimately led to me having this tea. It's also things like I'm in Finland where I got that tea. And I'm in Finland because I didn't choose that I was born in the US. I didn't choose that I was born into a Christian family. I didn't choose what kind of traumas I would face in my life that ultimately led to me making the kind of choices or feeling like I made choices where I ended up moving to a different country where I have a cup of tea now. So there's all kinds of things. And I keep that in mind with people around me. We don't choose the traumas in our life. We don't choose where we were born. We don't choose what kind of class, upper, lower, middle class, that we were born into. We don't choose the kind of education that we had access to. We don't choose the government programs that our country provides for us. We don't choose so many things. Ultimately, I don't believe we choose anything, but you get what I'm saying. There's so many other influences where we can see these things when we look at, like I said, dropping a rock into the water. We're like, yeah, like a rock got dropped and displaced the water and the water comes up and that's what happens. But that's also what's happening with us as humans. It's just that we're so much more complex and we have so many other things going on. So it's feeling like we're choosing things, but we're really just like the rest of the universe. We're not that special. We're not special at all, actually, which is the coolest thing about being a human, I think, is acknowledging, we're not like these very important humans that God made and we're better than everything else around us somehow. And yet also we're deserving of hell just because we were born and exist, but nothing else that exists is worthy of hell. I don't know. It's crazy. But what do we do with this information? What do we do with the idea that we're not choosing what we do and don't do in life, that people around us ultimately aren't choosing these things? Is there accountability for anything? How do we have morality? What does that look like? I think it's, like I said, it's important to continue living our lives as though we are choosing these things. And we do. Like, that's what we all do. We all really, like, this feeling is what keeps us going a lot. But I think one of the coolest things about determinism is that it has massively increased empathy that I have. And it has increased the compassion I have for myself as well, because I look around me and I see, you know what, I have no idea what happened to that person in their childhood, or how they grew up, or what they did or didn't have access to. I I don't know what little things I've experienced in life that have led me to different choices that I feel like I've made. I think that people are acting based off of nature and experiences and things beyond their control. None of us chose to exist. We just didn't. We can make choices or feel like we're making choices to continue to exist, but we're not just living off of willpower. This is not a thing that where, I ultimately really chose to have this cup of tea. I really didn't, is the crazy cool part. And I think embracing that mystery and this crazy paradox of enjoying the feeling of making these choices, I think that's what's really fascinating about this paradox of, we still need accountability. We still should act as though we are making these choices. We still should teach responsibility and all of that. But it also should broaden things to where we want to come up with long-term, larger impact solutions. So when we see people who don't have food, which that's a real topic in the news, when people don't have food, they're going to act certain ways that they don't act when they do have access to food. So maybe that's a problem we want to solve for everybody. When people grow up in situations where they don't have access to education, it's going to give them less opportunities in certain situations. Maybe we want to bring solutions there. So I think to me, that's the benefit of acknowledging that we don't have free will, because it can make us think in broader terms as to what kind of solutions we want to advocate for everybody, not because they deserve it or they earned it or they made some kind of great choices in life, but because we're humans and we want to see fellow humans living the best, healthiest, happiest lives that they can, where they're not harming others, where they're not being harmed. And it turns out so much of that, so many of those solutions are not about teaching individuals willpower and diligence and making your bed every morning. It's actually about providing resources and setting people up for success and looking after others and protecting others from harm. That's my little rant. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments. I don't know how much of that made sense or how much of it didn't, because I have like one word notes here that I'm using to help me figure out how to word this knot in my brain that I love to think about all the time. It is such an interesting thing. And I hope that nobody's listening to this and freaking out and feeling how I felt the very first time I thought about this, which is like, oh my God, what? I'm not making choices. It's okay. This has been happening. There's nothing new under the sun. It's just a cool thing to ponder and think about and use as a tool to expand life, not to freak you out, not to make you do less, not to avoid or ignore or, allow things that shouldn't be. It's just to learn more about the universe around us and like I said, what kind of solutions are going to be the most beneficial as a humanist to yourself and those around you. On that note, let's take a little break. When we come back, I do want to talk about this story of a pastor's son in Indiana. You might want to skip it if you're not in the mood for negative. So, like I said, this next story gets pretty dark. The reason I think it's important to talk about these, quote, evangelical scandals is because accountability is so rare in these circles. If you grew up in these churches, you understand how pervasive abuse and addiction and a lot of it usually gets very sexual, a lot of weird sexual stuff happening that just gets covered up. And festers. And when it is brought to light, I like to help bring it to light even more. Which, on that note, there are also some other videos over on another YouTube channel that I got to help create called Officially Bad Behavior. And I'll link that in the description of this video. But if you're interested in hearing about Robert Morris, the Michael Tate scandal, all of those, you can find those videos over there. But this one I wanted to talk about is a bit darker than those, if you can even believe it. But I'm glad that it was found out. Hope that the ripples of it bring to light anything else that needs to. And for some of you, you might just find it cathartic to be told, yeah, you weren't crazy. This shit is happening and it's awful. But this story is about a pastor's son. I'm going to butcher this last name, I think, but Nathan Peternell, I believe. Nathan Peternell is the lead pastor of Life Church in Indiana. One of the pastors there that works with Nathan Peternell is the lieutenant governor of Indiana, Micah Beckwith. And they even host a podcast together that is called Jesus, Sex, and Politics, which is wild because listen to what just happened. Nathan's 24-year-old son, Jonathan, a National Guard member, was arrested on charges of child exploitation and child sex abuse material. First of all, this is I don't understand. And there's already so many details of this case I wish I didn't read. I got this, by the way, from the Roy's report. It's actually a Christian journalist, Julie Roy's, but I really appreciate the work that her and her team do. So you can go read about it there if you want to read the whole thing. I will warn you, it's extremely graphic. I don't recommend it. There are other news outlets that have posted stuff that have less details, but the Roy's report is very thorough when it comes to their stories. So anyways, that being said, they found photos and videos of his parents, so of Nathan Peternell and his wife, engaged in sex acts and like nude images and stuff. So this pastor's son had all kinds of stuff. I think it said upwards of 50 videos of his parents. Not even sure what that's all about. Everything else they found, what he actually got arrested for, is some of the most horrific things I've ever read about. Take my word for it, it is the worst of the worst. It's really, really disturbing child sex abuse material. And there was over 200 files that they found. It was shared in a Snapchat group called the Diddy Files, as in P. Diddy. So that's also a whole nother fascinating thing. What is infuriating to me is I went to see, like, did the church make statements and stuff? And the church did put out a statement. And it said something about being committed to the highest standards of integrity, which is the biggest joke, because what do you mean you're going to stay committed to? You already lost it. You can't, your own son is participating in horrific things. These stories are going to keep happening as long as religious oppression happens. Purity culture not only allows for this to happen, but it creates an environment for it. When you have that much, let me be careful. I believe it can take what are small issues that somebody, quote, in the real world could probably seek therapy or help with and would resolve these things. But when you have this much shame and stigma surrounding just normal, healthy sexuality, I don't think you understand how quick something can go south. And unfortunately, I grew up knowing a lot of guys that were really fucked up sexually and disturbed and needed help. And instead of having access to that help, they were shamed and told to hide it. And the more they would hide it, the weirder things would get. And it's very sad. It is extremely sad. But I am so glad when things like this come out. What I am frustrated about is that they continually get treated like these little side things. Like, oh, that's crazy. What a freak of nature event. But when they keep happening, at what point do you not address the root issue, which in my opinion is absolutely purity culture, which is another thing I want to get into sometime, purity cultures. That's a great topic for you guys to send some questions in for. On that note, let's get to the Q&A section. You guys sent in some questions. I've got a few of them here. And I'm going to start with one that was clearly meant to be, at least in my opinion, clearly meant to be passive aggressive. And I'm assuming it's from a theist. But I thought it would be fun to answer this one. This question says, do you have any arguments besides why God real and me not convinced? I often hear from theists that atheists just say the same stuff over and over and over again, that we don't have any new arguments, et cetera, et cetera. That's because atheism is just a response to theism. We aren't going to come up with any kind of new arguments or anything new to say until you guys have some kind of evidence to present. When the arguments that we are getting, when the claims are the exact same over and over and over again, the responses really are things like, why do you think a God exists? Why God real? Give me a good reason. Why should I believe this? And the other answer is, I'm not convinced, because I'm truly not convinced that a God exists unless you give me a reason to. So yes, it is that simple. Those are the arguments. However, on that note, I will have a book out next year, which I'll have more details for you guys on that a few episodes from now. But I will have a book coming out, and it's not a tiny book, and it has all kinds of arguments in there for you. So you can look forward to that one. The next question I've got here: is it unethical to continue as a professional ministry leader while deconstructing your faith? I think this is a great question. I actually get asked this a lot. And before I give my opinion, I want to share about the Clergy Project, which is an amazing organization that helps, as you can imagine, clergy members from any kind of faith background. If your livelihood is dependent on being a clergy member and you are questioning and you want to get out, they help set you up for success with that. They provide support, financial support. They also provide like mentors and all of that. So please check out the Clergy Project. Amazing organization. Very grateful for them. Do I think it's unethical to continue as a professional ministry leader? There's so many things about this. On the one hand, I assume you're taking a salary that comes from people paying tithes. And a lot of times people that pay tithes don't have the money to really be doing that. My concern would come in there. However, that money is going to go to somebody. So then on the other hand, part of me is like, well, if it's helping you to get by because you didn't choose to grow up this way, you didn't choose to find yourself in that situation, back to free will, but you are trying to get out now and they've kind of crippled you to make it difficult to leave, then I understand staying. So ultimately, I think my main thing would come into being a ministry leader. If you can do so while you're working on transitioning out, and if you can do so without continuing to harm others. And what I mean by that is perpetuating ideas, beliefs that, aren't in line with your values, that aren't in line with your character, then go for it. If, maybe you're in some kind of progressive church, maybe you're in a situation where you're not really having to sit and like actually pray with people or actually go against things that you don't find yourself aligned with. I do think it kind of wears away at you the longer you stay involved in something, and especially the longer you're accepting money for something that you are adamantly against, that does not line up with your values, because you're kind of encouraging this thing that you yourself are discouraged by. All of that being said, with the economy the way that it is, with all of that, do what you need to do to feed your family to stay okay. But I think the goal should be to get out and to not do that as soon as you can for your own sake. Because I think the mental health implication of doing something like that when you don't want to it's just going to wear you down. So that's my long, very nuanced take. The last question before we get on to kind of the closing of this episode. Someone said, dealing with the recent death of my mom as the only atheist in my family, any advice? First of all, I'm so sorry for your loss. Grief post-faith is so interesting, and I have a whole chapter on it in my book, but especially when you're the only one that doesn't believe that you'll see this person ever again. The rest of your family has these kinds of coping things to fall back onto. And I think it can be infuriating because you just want them, you're like, accept this. Like this is it. Be sad with me. Like, this is horrifically sad. And I I think that's what I would lean into, is allowing yourself to feel that horrific sadness. That's grief. I mean, grief is just this overwhelming wave. And instead of trying to swim out of it and, they're in a better place now and we'll see them again someday, you kind of just have to ride the wave, which I think is the benefit of grief as an atheist. We're really fully aware of the gravity of situations. So when I'm spending time with my loved ones now, I'm really trying to get as much out of it and put as much into it as I possibly can, because I don't believe I'll ever see them again once they're gone. And so my advice would be to feel the things. If that means anger at your family for what they're not feeling, feel that too. If that means feeling angry that you can't bring yourself to believe that you're going to see them again someday because you wish you had that hope, be upset about that. Experience grief in all the different ways that you are experiencing it, and don't try to stop it. That's my personal advice. On another note, there's also something called, let me look it up because I have to share this. I think it's a really helpful organization. Okay, that's right. It is called griefbeyondbelief.org. They have a lot of resources over there, so check that out. But yeah, I think it sounds cliche, but lean into the grief. Actually grief. Feel what you feel, even if that includes the complexity of being angry at those around you and being upset with them, because that is another layer to the grief that is worth acknowledging and feeling. Before we close our Sunday service, I thought we'd have a small moment of, I don't know, not communion, like a sacred moment. I love poetry, and I thought it could be fun or nice to read a little poem, sometimes a little meditation, something like that at the end of each episode. And this one that I found, I think, is so beautiful. It's by Pat Schneider. And it says, "It is a kind of love, is it not? How the cup holds the tea, how the chair stands sturdy and foursquare, how the floor receives the bottoms of shoes or toes, how soles of feet know where they're supposed to be. I've been thinking about the patience of ordinary things, how clothes wait respectfully in closets, and soap dries quietly in the dish, and towels drink the wet from the skin of the back, and the lovely repetition of stairs. And what is more generous than a window?" Oh, I just love that so much. Just this idea of kind of animating everyday objects and romanticizing life. That is one of my favorite things about not adhering to dogma anymore, is finding my own meaning in things. And so, yes, being grateful and like romanticizing the idea that this cup is holding my tea, because I get to decide that matters. And it does. To me, it really matters that this cup is holding my tea right now. Otherwise, it would be all over the place. But I just thought that was such a lovely thought and wanted to leave that with you guys today. So maybe go about your day and notice some little odd things that you could romanticize and find joy, and maybe label some everyday objects with some beautiful character traits today. Anyways, that is the end of our show. Thank you for this first Sunday service with me. I hope that it gets smoother as we go throughout the weeks. I'll see you guys Wednesday and then again next Sunday. This is the Promise Backlund Show. Go do something kind today.